Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Night Live. Whew, man, the weeks are just flying by. Half the year is already over, so now we're going down the downslope for the next 6 months or so. But it's been an interesting year, a good one. My knees are really good. I think I'm going to stop giving the updates because I think I'm beyond anything that is interesting, although you guys might have said it would stop being interesting a month ago, who knows, but it's working. So tonight, we have with us Anthony Musci. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep, you got it.
All right, now, who is this guy you're thinking? This guy was on the original design team, the Aston Martin V12 engine. Now that's big. I went to engineering school for about a year and a half, and I just couldn't take it. At that school, you're drawing nuts and bolts. And after, a year plus of drawing bolts, I'm like, I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. So I got into the car business. Who knew, right? And now it's 41 plus years later. But this guy stuck with it, and some really cool things. Having rebuilt engines myself, I can appreciate everything that goes into building an engine, much less creating an engine, making the pieces and the castings and making sure that all the pieces fit together. You've got the bore, you've got the stroke, you've got to worry about the crankshaft and the balancing and the chains and the camshafts and all of the other things that go into it. And this guy was on the team that created that. I mean, how cool is that? So Anthony, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell everybody a little bit about you, how you got started, and don't go past 5th grade, though, because then it gets too long.
So I'll just start really with kind of my engineering career and a little bit before then. I've always been passionate about things mechanical, more so aircraft than cars, but somehow I ended up in the auto industry, which was a good thing. I have no regrets. And when I did, one of the first assignments that I had at Ford, which was a great opportunity for a young engineer, which was a program called the Ford College Graduate Program, or FCG program, as Ford calls it for short. And essentially what that allowed me to do is to go in all different areas of the company: product design, purchasing, systems design, components design, working in plants, working in some of the test facilities, et cetera, and really get a good survey of the company and really prepare me for any later job that I was going to do. So fast forward a little bit from that 2-year program, and here I am working at Ford Advanced Powertrain, which, long story there, but the short version is I lobbied pretty hard to get in there. And I was doing a couple of really interesting projects on some extremely lightweight engines, and the Aston Martin opportunity sort of came along. It was something that they were playing with the idea of. And I looked at it, and as a young, stupid engineer, I didn't realize that, you're not supposed to raise your hand and say something when you see a problem. So I wrote a letter to my boss's boss's boss. And again, being young and stupid and not knowing that you're not supposed to do that was probably a good thing in this case. So I wrote to the chief engineer, a guy by the name of Jim Clark at Ford Advanced Powertrain Engineering. And I said, look, I saw this prototype that you guys are looking at. There's a lot of issues with it. Here's where I see the issues, and here's what I think should be fixed. And again, this wasn't coming from a place of arrogance. It was coming from enthusiasm, where I really wanted to help. And Jim looked at me. Actually, at the time I wrote the letter, I hadn't met him. I'd seen him in a couple of meetings, but I hadn't personally met him one-on-one. So I sent this memo up through the chain. I had my boss sign it. And at the time, my boss would sign a lot of routine documents. So I don't think he paid a lot of particular attention to this particular memo. And it got sent off to the chief engineer. And about a week later, we get notification that, the big boss wants to see us. And my boss is like, do you know anything about this? So I'm like, yeah, that's the memo I sent. He says, what memo? I said, well, the one I had you sign. And he's like, well, which one was that? And I showed it to him, and he practically had a heart attack. So we go into Jim Clark's office, and he basically says to me, who the hell are you? And I explain, I'm this, I saw this, and here's what happened, and I wanted to write to you. And I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I understand kind of his perspective a lot better. And what he saw was a young engineer that was willing to be, very straight with him, very enthusiastic. Hopefully he saw some talent. And, I said, here's what I think we should do. And before I knew it, he kind of said, okay, go ahead and do that. Well, we come out of there and my boss says to me, well, I don't want this to take too much of your time. And I'm thinking to myself, what, is he kidding me?
Creating something new.
Yeah. Now we're not an official program, and it wasn't a done deal, right? What really was happening was that the chief engineer, Jim Clark, he was rolling the dice and saying, well, let's see what this young kid can do. And sure enough, I started creating some of the stuff in concept, and I pulled in another guy by the name of Don Noland, and then shortly after that, a third guy by the name of Bernard Ibrahim. And we were all, three very young guys in our early 20s that were highly enthusiastic, and we started, pulling resources in. And really, not being an official program, there wasn't a budget per se. I mean, Jim Clark had a budget in advanced powertrain engineering, but we were not official, so we couldn't really be doing a new engine. It was kind of out of the question. But if we did it piece by piece and started to expand it, and as long as he saw progress, he was willing to stick with it. And my personal goal, it was a lot like a startup, right? Here I am at Ford, and my goal every day was to make enough progress and to show enough going on to not get canceled, because we could have gotten canceled in a heartbeat on any day. And sure enough, bit by bit, we started getting there. And what was funny was Jim took a chance, but then we had, a group of the guys that were a lot older working for us that were, just fantastic. However, a lot of these guys would say to me, they're like, look, this is Ford Motor Company, boys. This is not how we do things. This isn't going to work out, the way you think.
We've all heard those voices,
right? But they were good guys, and they humored us. And they said, one of them was a guy by the name of Cass Katarba, and he kind of humored us, and he said, he didn't say these words exactly, but he says, all right, I'll give you guys a chance, and seeing that you're young guys was really the message there. So sure enough, he goes along and he really helped us. I mean, he was a huge resource, and within the drafting room, which was both at that time really converting to CAD from the board, he helped us out. And before you, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So basically, the computerized drawing versus what you do in the past, and because of that help, that went a long way, and we were able to make more progress. But what was even more remarkable is that the guys we were working with started to become converted. They're saying, hey, these are really good guys. We see progress here. And there became a point when, people started to believe that, maybe there's a chance that this program could actually do something. And a big part of that was, I think, a lot of our personalities as well. We weren't telling them, throwing something over the wall and saying do it, but it was very collaborative. Even though, we may have been at different levels of the company, those guys were our peers. And in a lot of ways, because they were older than us, we were really learning a lot from them. They were imparting their knowledge, and back and forth. So there was a lot of a good rapport was forming. From there, we had to really bring in a supply base, and had that same exact problem, because the suppliers are like, well, this isn't a real program. How are we going to get paid for this if this really happens? So we had to figure out ways of reducing their risk and really moving it forward and having them participate without spending a lot of money in the early stages. And little by little, we kind of grew where people were starting to really start to say, this is the real deal. And we had to do that rather quietly for a long time too, because we weren't an official program and not sanctioned. So that was a big part of it. Towards the end of the program, we knew we had a good deal, because people would come in and, they're showing their families what's going on with prototypes and things like that. Now, they weren't really violating any rules in terms of nothing was getting to the press, but they'd come in and they'd give the kids a peek at the car, or they give the wife a peek at the car, and kind of show them, this is where I've been spending all these crazy hours. and that was a big benefit, because people had a lot of pride in the work. Their families could see what they were doing. They were proud of it. It was fun to come to work. I mean, I had a lot of guys tell me, they've been at work at Ford 20, 30 years, and this was the most fun project they ever had. And then when we get to the end of that, a lot of the suppliers were coming back and saying, we need to run every program like this because, a big part of it, any program that you're on, something goes wrong. I mean, stuff just goes wrong. And when you have that relationship and you're honest up front and you're telling people, as soon as it reduces the risk, it makes the turnaround faster, the relationships are stronger. So that was a big part of kind of bringing everything together.
Now, what was the inspiration behind coming up with? They didn't have the engine. Was it chasing Ferrari or Porsche or some of these other groups? What was the deal?
So that's a complicated question, and I'll give you a complicated answer, but it's a good one. It's an excellent question. So there are multifacets to this problem. I mean, first and foremost, and we'll talk more about this later, remind me, but Aston Martin sales globally at the low were down to 42 cars a year. Less than one a week. Okay, there was no dealer network in the United States. At that time that I got involved, DB7 6-cylinder was coming into being. It had been, I don't remember the exact timing. I don't know if it had just been shown or was about to be shown, but I had seen it. And there was a 6-cylinder, 3.2-liter supercharged DB7 that was coming out, and it was based on the old Jaguar XJS chassis. Now, this chassis was a little dated, but they were doing quite a bit to update it, and the car was gorgeous. And there was this kind of universal feeling of, wow, this car could be the rebirth of Aston Martin. It was very well received at the Geneva Auto Show, but it was also perceived that maybe it's not quite there on power. Now, in terms of Ford's stable, if you will, at the time, at the very top was Aston Martin, and Aston Martin, I believe, was acquired in '87. Jaguar was acquired in '89, a little bit later, and there's a whole other story between how the car gestated, which I won't get into, but they were acquired a little later, and then they had a number of other brands all the way down the Ford lineup. And one of the other issues was, here the DB7 came out with a 6-cylinder, 3.2-liter supercharged inline engine, and we knew that Jaguar was coming out with a similar segment car which was going to be called the XK8 with a naturally aspirated V8. And you could kind of argue that, okay, maybe the supercharged 6 is a little lighter and has more power than the V8, and that maybe is a credible argument, but it didn't really give Aston the gravitas that they were going to need to move forward, right? But the other issue was that we also knew that the XKR, which was an improved version of the XK8, was coming out with a supercharged V8. And that was going to really cause a problem because you could get, a Jaguar for X and an Aston was going to cost, 1.5X. And how are you going to justify this in the market lineup? So we need to do something very unique. It was felt that a 12 could do it. There was a lot of controversy about, they've never done a 12 before. And again, that's a whole nother story as well. But our thought process was this is a very appropriate engine. If we do a good job, we can redefine the brand a little bit while still honoring its past history, which I think is a very important part. You don't want to come in and mess the whole thing up, but at the same time, technology changes and being able to go from era to era is very important. And personally, one of our main goals was to really go in there and, beat the snot out of Ferrari. I mean, we were going to do that. And one particular opportunity that we saw was a lot of, or almost every V12 that was out there was doing an excellent job at high revving and making all kinds of power and being smooth. And as we looked at it and studied it, and I'd studied everything from hot rods to Formula One cars to every road car there is to airplane piston engines to jet engines, you name it. And I'm looking at the Ferraris, the Lamborghinis, and all the classic stuff that had been out there. And they were all good, high-revving, high-power cars. And I thought, yep, we can do that. But what really I thought they were lacking in is they didn't have good low and mid-range torque. And I thought, well, now here's an opportunity to really clobber these guys. And as part of the history of Aston Martin as well, if some of your viewers probably know that, the last time they had won Le Mans was way back with Carroll Shelby. In fact, Shelby was what made his name driving for Aston Martin before he ever did the Cobras or the GT40s. He was really a driver first, yeah. And in 1959, he raced for Aston Martin, and Roy Salvadori and Carroll Shelby brought the DBR car to victory overall to 24 hours in Le Mans. And, so I knew that history, and I also knew, a lot of the Ford history with the GT40 and all that. And I thought, boy, we can do something rather unique here. We put a lot of focus into not only matching the high-end horsepower, but providing phenomenal amounts of low and mid-range torque. And it really changed the industry, changed what Ferrari did going forward. They had to react to it. And that, again, that's another story. But, putting a lot of the muscle car magic into the V12, as well as having it rev to the high end and making all kinds of power, was a real big part of that. And just to give you an example, on the first iteration of the engine, which was the first one and didn't have all the bells and whistles we were going to put in, like, cam phasers and a lot of neat stuff coming down the line, but we had to execute and get it in that car. At 1,000 RPM, it had 340 foot-pounds of torque, which is basically off idle. So it was a monster. I mean, you put your foot into it and it goes.
Un animal.
Exactly. If it doesn't scare you, it doesn't have enough power.
Exactly. And we've all driven cars that have scared us. But that's cool. I mean, that certainly is. Those are lofty goals to go after as a young engineer, just out of engineering school.
Well, it's really, if you study history and there's what they call R&D, right? So you do your research first, and then you do your development. I'm more worried about me not being able to match the next generation car, but there's no reason I shouldn't be able to match something I can buy today. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And the tools are so good today that, if you really know what you're doing, you can really bring it together. And a big part of that was, of course, our enthusiasm. Hopefully, we were reasonably smart guys, I'd like to think anyway. But also, it was really about bringing to bear everyone's experience that we had. And that was from the suppliers to all the people on the team at all levels, and you really kind of pulling that all in and really making that product outstanding. And that was just, a big part of it. I mean, everybody from the manufacturing engineers, the quality engineers, having all those relationships, the mechanics, and everybody's got ideas, and you're trying to kind of pull them all in and really utilize them. And I certainly had a few good ideas and implemented them, but a lot of other people did as well, and it was really a teamwork effort.
Well, hold on one second. Hey, Andy. All right, the guy that's speaking now is Andy Musci. He was on the original design team for Aston Martin's V12 engine. So that's who he is. Let's go through the comments here. John Neeb says hello. Joe Perez, our good buddy. Best show ever. And Michael Larkin. Hi, all. Mike Larkin here from West Hartford. Joe Perez says that you and I are two of his favorite people, man.
All right, Joe. Thanks.
And we got Paul Machine in the house. My buddy from Black Book says hola all. And Paul Machine, let's see. Joe Perez says, hey, Paul, happy Sunday. Paul Machine says, you had me at low to mid-range torque, added to high-range torque. Paul Machine says, hi, Joe. And Joe Perez says, Anthony Musci, the young Ford engineer that saved Aston Martin.
Well, it was really a team effort. There's no doubt about it. But I'd like to think I had a little bit of a part in it, and I definitely had some fun along the way. So I should say something about engine power, because one of your viewers made a comment. So as an engine guy, and I've had some fun doing a lot of design, I will tell you there's no such thing as too much power. There are only inadequate chassis.
Yes. I'll give you an example of that.
Or drivers.
I'll tell you what. I took in a Shelby GT500. Okay. Car's a monster. I'm taking it through the back lot. I'm just rolling along at 25 miles per hour. When I put my foot through the floorboard, The next thing I know, I'm counter steering because the car is all over the place. All right. The tires can't hold on to the road. It's a monster, but they can't hold on to the road. So I back off, basically I avoided slamming into a bunch of parked cars. Now, I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I'm thinking it's a good idea to take this up on the highway to see what she can do. I'm cruising along on the highway at 60, 65, whatever it was. I downshift and punch it. The back end starts swimming on the highway at that speed. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm getting off the next exit. I do not belong in a car like this. But to your point, the engine's great. But if it can't grab the road, I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. There are some situations where you're going to overwhelm the tires, but at higher speeds and different gears, it can make a difference. And that's one of those cars where we're all used to kind of getting in a car, and most cars you can slam the throttle full down at any speed or any gear, but when you get to a certain level of performance, that's not so much the case, and you got to really get in tune with and understand what that is.
Like I've been in some high-end Benzes. You stomp on the gas, the car goes. You don't lose anything. It just goes, and it keeps going. You run out of nerve before you run out of car.
Well, sometimes on the more modern cars, it's probably cutting out more power than you think, because the engine would overwhelm it, but they can electronically back the power out so the chassis is not overwhelmed.
Now, Joe Perez says that you're being modest. And DJ Pukan says, when did the infamous Ford bureaucracy try to kill the the program?
So there's a long story there. I mean, it's a little bit of a Ford v Ferrari story. It's probably maybe a little bit too long to get into on this particular conversation. I certainly had my fun at Ford. I learned a ton. I'm very grateful for the experience, for sure. But we certainly had our obstacles.
It's kind of progressive of Ford to put such a young team on a project like that. I mean, I know you weren't an official project, but let's face it. I think the underlings there, it was an unofficial project as far as I could see.
So I got to calibrate you a little bit on that, okay? So first and foremost, most people at Ford didn't know, including many of the executives, that we actually owned Aston Martin at the time. And they would often mispronounce Aston Martin as Austin Martin, and it was confusion with Austin Healey, not understanding which brand it was. And you kind of gotta go back. There were zero dealer networks in the United States at this time, and there were zero cars being sold. So, familiarity with the brand, other than maybe way back from the Sean Connery days, weren't really there. In Europe, it was a bit exactly. In Europe, it was a bit stronger, but even then, at 42 cars a year, you're not making a big impression, and it's kind of a nostalgic brand at the time more than it was a mainstream one like Ferrari. And we saw that the potential between some of their racing history and how strong their brand had been to kind of build on that and bring it back to really a Ferrari competitor, but yet still have some unique brand characteristics in there that really made it, not a Ferrari clone, but its own thing, and unique and good in its own way. But kind of getting back to your original question, because of that, the brand didn't have a lot of visibility within Ford. Okay, so it was very easy to hide something like that in terms of what's going on.
Off the radar.
Yeah, it's off the radar. And then there was also rumors, which we were probably guilty of not squashing, that said, well, if this program does go well, you could get sold with it and be moved on. And most people at Ford were completely unwilling to do that. So that was a bit of kryptonite for a lot of people to keep them away.
Okay, that makes sense.
But, if I went back to Ford today and said, and they owned Aston, which they don't, it's since been sold, but let's say they did, it would be very difficult for me, because it would be to get that program, because it would be all these blue ribbon committees you'd have to go through. And they would never give it to a bunch of young guys. In fact, when we were first working with Aston Martin, and we went over and saw them, and this is it wasn't the first trip, but it was one of the early trips. we had met some new people who hadn't met us before, and they were totally floored and thought Ford didn't take Aston Martin seriously because they're thinking, we just got a couple of kids to design this engine. It's all, what you know, they don't care about Aston Martin. We got hosed here. This is terrible. And, their view of us was probably what, like they would, someone would view Bart Simpson characters, right? Now, we played on that as well, to tell you the truth, and had some fun kind of twisting their tails a little bit. It was all in good fun and good natured, but, we pretended like we didn't take things seriously, or we weren't that smart a few times, just to have some fun. But I think they saw rather quickly that, we were working our butts off and we were going to make this happen. When the first engine went into the first car, it had been shipped over literally just the day before I got there. And I showed up, and, the Aston guys are like, the engine just went right in the car. I'm like, yeah. They're like, no, but it bolted up, motor mounts and pierce points for exhaust, and, like it was designed to fit. And I'm like,
it was.
and part of that was that Aston Martin never had the benefit before, and it was a newer technology, and Ford had a lot of money, of designing a car completely with computers, on computer-aided design, and being able to do that. And they were hugely impressed. We put it in the car, fired it up, and it was a very preliminary calibration, but it was very well running, and did kind of all the basic things we needed. And literally on that first day, everybody knew, yeah, we have a Ferrari competitor. We got a real winner here. This program is going to go. And it was they were impressed. I never had any trouble after that day. In fact, the V12, which was 5.9 liters, aluminum block, aluminum heads, basically a 4-valve V12, so 48 valves, versus the the 6-cylinder 4-valve, aluminum block, aluminum heads, was actually, with transmission, was actually 40 pounds lighter than the 6-cylinder car.
Oh, wow.
It was a big, big deal. We originally, we didn't have all the data. See, this was another interesting thing. On most programs, you're going to go forward and you're just going to be like, okay, let's get my assumption was like, it's like a normal program. So we go in and we say, well, give us all the computer data on the current model of the car, right? I mean, it's a logical thing to ask for, and it didn't exist. Well, why didn't
there was no data?
There was no, well, I wouldn't say there was no data, but there was no computer data, because the chassis predated all that. Yeah. But then when I asked Aston Martin for the data, there really wasn't a lot of depth in the data, at least at the time. I know that's changed since. So I'm like, well, why is there no data? I realized it was a Jaguar chassis. So I made a trip over to Jaguar, got all the drawings, and they were done, 20 plus years prior. And even those drawings were not at the level of sophistication, and it wasn't anything anyone had done wrong. It was just a different era that they were from.
Sure.
And we realized that there had been enough changes made, and it was going to take us a very, very long time to develop that model, that we actually scanned one of the cars, knowing that it's not perfect, because one car doesn't represent all the parts. It represents itself, but kind of getting a feel for where we are. And then we came to some agreed to standards of, how we're going to proceed with this program. And I'll give you an example. So I went to the factory and I told the guys, look, I know we don't have a ton of money here and a huge budget, so we got to work together on this. And I need you to build a car that's representative as you think it can be, because you guys build these cars day in and day out. Then they were building a 6-cylinder car at the time.
Yeah.
I want you to build it in a special way, and it's what we call the driver's ed car. And they say, what the heck do I mean by that? Now, it wasn't a functional car, but for purposes of packaging, it was completely functional. We built it with 2 steering wheels. It had a double-headed steering rack, because we knew we were going to make left and right-hand drive cars.
Yeah.
It had master cylinders on both sides. It had all the things you would have for left or right-hand drive car in one car. And then we scanned that entire car in, minus an engine and transmission, and came to an agreement with Aston Martin. And this was a very, very important piece of information, because when you're going to have problems going forward whenever you do a production car. right? And you don't want it to be, a fighting match. It's when you get a problem, the focus has to be on not pointing fingers, but working as a team and solving the issue. But what we also needed was some pre-agreed to situation, because they didn't have complete drawings of how we were going to go about doing this. And the way we had done that is we said, okay, you're going to build this car, the driver's ed car. We're going to bring it over to Dearborn. We're going to scan it all in. We're going to make a computer model of this car. And we're going to give ourselves more clearance room than we would on a typical program, so many X number of millimeters. And then there's going to be, kind of like this no man's zone where nobody can be, because the engine moves a little bit. It's mounted on motor mounts. It's not rigidly mounted, and there's a little bit of clearance. And then when it drops in, it's relatively precise, but it can move a little tiny bit from car to car. And you have to account for all that. So we have a space of no man's land, which is clearance all the way around the chassis.
Yeah.
And then we had a line which they're not able to violate. And we had a line which we're not able to violate. And they're kind of like, it's kind of like between, this is their side, that's our side, this is no man's land. And what that did was, if things changed over time, or they had a problem, or even if we didn't get the drawings completely right from the chassis side because we didn't have complete information, it was automatically their responsibility if they violated this line. And it was automatically our responsibility if we violated that line. So there was no ambiguity going forward, and it was a clear direction to everybody, and we all agreed to it. So it was, we got buy-in that way, and it was a way for us to kind of manage the program going forward. The longer-term plan, of course, was to get the full chassis in on the CAD system and modernize all of Aston Martin, which was a big part of that whole process. But we really transitioned from what looked more like a kit car, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but they were more hand-built.
Yeah.
Kind of walking into, how do we make them a modern, low-volume production source that's going to be extremely high quality and the customers are going to love, and that whole transition plan. On the dealer side as well, when we brought the V12 in, we had to do that part of the plan as well. We're not going to just, throw this over the wall, but, it was a unique opportunity with the dealers. There were no dealers. So, how do you do your R&D? Well, I did talk to customers, of course. I talked to Aston customers and Ferrari customers, but I also talked to Ferrari dealers and Porsche dealers and Corvette dealers, and I talked to some Aston dealers in Europe, and there weren't too many. And I also talked to a lot of Ford dealers and said, what can we do? And really tried to pick and cherry pick all the best different pieces so that when this car hit the road or hit the dealerships, it was ready to go. It had all the service things in place. All the documentation was there. And, you really wanted to give not only the customer the wow factor, but I wanted to give the dealers and the service technicians and everybody throughout the chain, like, wow, this is a thing. This isn't thrown together. This isn't like, they thought about it. And that was a big, big part of kind of bringing that all together.
Wow. Let's see, we got a couple of comments here. Paul Machine says, I love the DB12. Joe Press says, Anthony's being, I got that before. Ron Usher worked on 2 V6s. Does that count as a V12? No, I don't think so, Ron. Also worked on top Aston Martin tech at Miller Motor Cars. Great show. Abel Aguirre says, good stuff. Kenneth Dunner, my buddy from Sugar Land, Texas. Paul Meyer, savor the flavor of the awesomeness, and you, sir, for sharing your delectable nuggets of wisdom, kindness, good patience, encouragement, empathy, understanding, sincere perseverance, knowledge, honesty. Wow. That's too many compliments in one long sentence, man. But thank you. Joe Perez says, Anthony, how many times has your engine and powertrain won Le Mans?
Oh boy, I know it's won at least twice. I'm trying to think of the count there. I was there for the first time. I wasn't there beyond that. It ran in the GT1 cars, ran in the LMP1 cars. It's a production-based block, that was really an important part of it. We knew, in addition to just designing the car and having a quality car that a guy can drive on the road, one of the objectives from day one, and the rules can always change. We knew this, but I had a rule book from Le Mans. I made sure I understood what it was. And it was like, okay, how do we design this thing from day one so that not only can we put it in the cars and do great with, against Ferrari on the road, but how can we take it to Le Mans? And it was a big part of the consideration of, putting all those features in up front so that the conversion became easy. And it also does the connection as well. The cars actually came out first in DB7, and a number of years later they put it in DB9 and won Le Mans. But the engine that you had in your very first DB9 and the one you can get in the DB11 today are all on that same base, and they, are basically just like the race car. So that's a great selling point. It's part of building the brand identity. It was fun to bring it back. Since Carroll Shelby won, it was all those things kind of built on the brand and the history and the connection to the car. I mean, as an owner, that you're not getting some derated thing that just happens to have 12 cylinders. You actually have the same engine in your car. It's not racing prepared, but it's pretty darn close. And the funny thing I like to tell people when they ask me about this is, so in the Le Mans Racing Series, there's a restrictor on the engines that keeps them from getting out of hand, and you have to go through an air restrictor. And at the time that it was run in the GT1 category, it was probably around 625, 650 horsepower max that you could get through the restrictor. The road cars that you can buy today, using that same engine in the Superleggera, have considerably more power than the Le Mans engines.
Wow.
Now, the Le Mans cars are lighter, so the power to weight is still better. But just to kind of give you, and most people don't think about it that way. They're like, well, it's a race engine. It's like, no, you can get actually more power. Now, not that you couldn't get more power out of the racing engine, but the rules were designed in such a way to kind of keep that all tight and have all these different brands competing. But it's an interesting comment on that the road cars actually make more power than the Le Mans car did.
Now, when you put the V12 in, was it the same tranny as the 6-cylinder and the same differential, or is that all changed as well?
So we changed all that. The original transmission was a 5-speed Getrag, and we put in a 6-speed Borg-Warner T56, which is now a Tremec T56. The Tremec was an excellent gearbox. There were some things I would have liked to have done that I didn't get the opportunity to, but that's a whole nother long story. But the Tremec gearbox, or the Borg-Warner at the time gearbox, was actually heavier than the Getrag 5-speed, and yet the engine and transmission combo was still 40 pounds lighter, and it also moved the center of gravity rearward because the trans was heavier, so the engine was more than 40 pounds lighter, and it all worked out pretty well. The ratios we selected were, we didn't have the ability, because we didn't have the volume to tool our own ratios from scratch, or the budget, I should say. But between what was going on that was used on Viper, it was used on Corvette, later on Camaro and Mustang, we had a fair number of gears to choose from, and they were very close to the ideal ratios. And by playing with what they had available and the rear end, we were able to get it in a very good sweet spot.
Nice. George P. wants to know, Anthony, when is the feature film coming out?
I don't know. You tell me.
Joe Perez says, right, Anthony, and Aston Martin versus Ford in Ferrari. Mark Williamson says, love getting the inside scoop on nostalgia/history within our industry. Yeah, no, that's what makes tonight's show pretty cool, because we don't really do much in the way of history on automotive, and this is real live history, and you were there for those groundbreaking moments. I mean, that's pretty cool.
We kind of felt at the time either we were going to do really well or it was going to disappear in nothing, and nobody would know about it. So we figured we better be on our A game and put our best efforts in. And it was a lot of fun. Everybody came to work every day, really working their butts off, kind of thinking like, this is what I went to school to do.
And at that time, nobody really knew if it was going to go anywhere, right? I mean, you have your hopes and dreams and your ideals, but when it comes right down to it, there's no guarantee that it's all gonna work.
I learned something kind of funny. So when you're older, you have experience and you can kind of figure things out, or you have the experience to know when things are going along the right way. When you're young and you don't know, you have a lot more energy but a lot less experience, but you can kind of make up for the lack of experience because you can work an obscene number of hours, and if you make a mistake, you can make it up by working another 10 hours that same day. We had some pretty astounding records. My peak record for a 2-week period. Any guesses on how many hours you can do in 2 weeks?
Oh God.
And I'll calibrate that for you. This is also why I was going to business school at night at the same time.
I'm gonna say 180 hours.
In 2 weeks?
Yeah.
217.
What?
It was so many hours that we submitted our time cards. They were rejected because they're like, oh, obviously this is an error. And my boss said, no. They worked those hours.
Wow.
This is not an error. And we got it fixed. But yeah, they were like, what is going on over there?
But you're right. When you're young, you can do that. You've got the drive to do it. And you know what? I know many times, and this doesn't even begin to compare with anything remotely what you guys did, but I know many times in my youth, I had hot rods that I'm working on. I needed to get stuff done, and I'm working. Let's put it this way. At 4 a.m, my dad would come out to the garage and start yelling at me because I'm revving the engine, right? I just put stuff together. I'm revving the engine. It's like, you can't run an engine at 4 a.m. People are trying to sleep. And mine wasn't exactly the quietest. I had the car with the N50s in the back and the 3.5-inch wheels in the front, the loud exhaust.
So we did have one advantage there. We could run the engines 24/7 because the test facilities were isolated and quieted, and we had multiple shifts running. We actually had more than one CAD shift running for the design drafting, and I would often come in the morning at like 5:30, 6 a.m., work with the guys that were just finishing up from the night shift.
Yeah.
And then I would work all day, usually, which was like 10 to 12 hours, usually 10 hours. I would go to school at night, which was about 30 miles away from Dearborn to Ann Arbor. And then I would turn around at 10 o'clock at night, drive back to Ford, do an hour with the night shift that was on again, come home, sleep, 5-6 hours, turn around and do the whole thing all over again.
Wow.
You can't do that for long periods of time because you'll be in a lot of trouble. And you can't. At my age now, I'm not as young as I was. I could not do that today.
No, when you're young, you can do that. Now we can't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'll go. I don't know. I could go 4 days of working really late into the night. But when I hit that 5th day is when I hit the wall, and then I'm sleeping until I wake up, whenever that is.
Yep.
Because the body needs to recoup. Joe Perez says somebody called Jay Leno. Abel Aguirre, let's see here. Nope. DJ Foucan says, when did Ferrari notice the new engine? Did they ever bump into you or talk with you?
So they didn't see it until it got into production. Ferrari had one of the target cars we were going up against, or at least one of the cars that was already out that we were going up against. We didn't know what they had planned for the future, was the Ferrari 550. All right. And Ferrari kind of had a thing where, they're like, well, our engines are perfect and we don't have to touch them. And then when the time comes, they revamp it and they come up with a new car. They generally don't revise cars, right? But this time they did. And the 550 was so out-torqued. This is my opinion on what I've observed. I've never heard this directly, but we had a lot of mid-range and low-end torque on them that they stretched the 550 as far as they possibly could given the current design. And they turned it into a 575 a year or two later. And to get and they focused on it. Didn't have much more horsepower, but they got a lot more torque out of it. But that was as far as they could stretch the engine. But then within a couple of years, they actually matched Aston Martin on displacement and went to a 6-liter V12 from their 5.5 liters. So we definitely got a reaction out of it.
I would say.
And they focus a lot more on mid and low range torque now.
It's funny. They probably acted like they didn't really notice.
Of course.
They were watching. It's like my dog and my cat, right?
I mean, I have a lot of respect for Ferrari. They're a great company. Competing with them was a lot of fun, and hopefully they feel the same.
Yeah, it's all in good fun. Abel Aguirre says, Anthony, what's the key to motivate others around you to be at the same level as you while doing a project like that?
Motivation is one thing. I mean, you lead by example, in that, you work hard, you're respectful to everybody. That's probably the most important thing. It's whenever you're a manager, it's not about you, it's about everybody else. But probably the key thing really is, we had a lot of people that were pretty average that joined the team, myself included. Right. And with experience, you can go a lot further. And one of the greatest things I think you do as a manager is, or a team leader, or whatever you want to call it, depending on your organization, is really figure out how to take everybody that, has all these different skills and improve their strong ones and really work on their weaknesses, myself included. And by doing that, by the end of that, we had the strongest team in Ford Motor Company, no doubt about it. And a big part of that is openness and sharing and really, like, I'll give you a great example of this. So the drafting guys were excellent draftsmen, but they weren't engineers, right? And so some of the background with how things work, wasn't necessarily their background. So if I had a guy designing a water pump, I'd spend an hour or so with them, and I'd sit down and I'd take it from, complex math to plain English. And I'd say, here's how it works. Here's what we're trying to do. This is ideal. We have packaging considerations. And we kind of walk through it as a simple story of, like, I could take the most complex thing. I say this not jokingly. Like, a great example is I have a bunch of students that I teach for engineering. And one of the things I tell them is, rocket science isn't that hard, right? And when we talk about, like, for example, rocket engines, we go through all the detail on that. And by the time they get to the end of it, they're like, wow, that was easier than I thought. Now, not to say that it isn't complex, but if you break it down into bits and you talk about it in English, almost anyone can get it. Applying the math is complex and takes some time. Well, the same is true with a water pump. So, I brought this gentleman in, we're sitting down, we're talking about it. He goes, I've designed, umpteen water pumps for all these different programs. This is the first time anybody sat down and explained it to me. Well, the benefit of that was that, here I am explaining my objectives, or our objectives, really, not just mine, but our objectives, and walking them through what it's going to take and what we're trying to do. And lo and behold, now he's got an understanding. I come back a week later as he's working on it and refining it, and he says, I was thinking about what you said, because now he gets it. He understands how it works, even if he doesn't know all the math. And he says, what if we did this, this, and this? And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, that's great. That's a serious improvement. And then, when the whole team was like that,
True collaboration.
True collaboration. And by the time we were done, everybody was excited, and they went on to be, they were much more knowledgeable regardless of what program they went on. They could be better contributors than they ever could before, and that was really the key. Another great example of this is, like, I can turn a wrench. I'm happy to do it, but the guys that turn the wrench every day, whether I like it or not, are more of an expert at it than I am. So I need to be talking to them and understanding their opinions and ideas. And even if they can't quite articulate them into full engineering terms, they know something. And then when I talk to them and kind of get it out of them, we bring a lot back, and it all kind of recycles back into the setup. Kind of along those lines, the servicing on this car is quite easy when it came out, and that's not by mistake. That's because of the collaboration and the teamwork.
Now, we're probably going to go over, because there's a lot of stuff I want to cover here.
All right.
So I hope you're okay with that. You said before, way before, the engine in the car is not about the numbers. What does that mean?
That's a good question. So the marketing guys probably would have been ready to kill me. But cars are sold on numbers, right?
Yeah.
How much horsepower do they have? how much torque do they have, what's their displacement, right? And far too often they're optimized around these what I'm going to call trick numbers or marketing numbers.
Okay.
All right, but in some ways, I really designed the car that I thought the customer would want, not the car I thought the marketing department would want. And you can give, as an example, you can give up a little tiny bit of peak power, but you can get all kinds of mid-range torque and low-end torque and do things. And it's the kind of reaction that I tell a customer, and they get it immediately if they've driven one. I say, have you driven one? And they say, yeah. I say, how does it compare to a car that has similar numbers? And they get it. They're like, oh yeah, it's way faster. You know, and it's not about hitting that target, you know, because it's like reading a book report, right?
Yeah.
You know, or a summary. It never has the full thing in there. And if the summary is the only thing you ever read, well, that may be enough, but you know, the car doesn't stand up to it. And it takes some discipline to do that because you get a lot of pressure to pump the numbers up.
Right.
You know, and that really, the numbers are supposed to be a measure of what you did, okay? But when they become the primary thing that you're targeting, what you did actually suffers. Right. So I was like, we're not going to make this car about the numbers. We're going to do what's right for the product, and then people are just going to know it. And it's one of those deals where customers constantly tell me, they're like, you know, I don't know what it is, but it just kind of, the car knows what I want to do. It works. It's one of the best cars I've ever driven, if not the best car. You know, what's the magic? And it's like, well, that's the thought process behind, you know, putting this all together.
My buddy David, I don't know if he still has it, but he had one for a while. He loved it.
We get the reaction a lot.
Was there a brand vision for the future of Aston Martin?
So we certainly wanted to be competitive with Ferrari, but we wanted to do something unique. And the unique part was obviously, you know, I talked a lot about getting the torque and putting a little bit of the muscle car magic in there, but at the same time as well, kind of playing off the James Bond image. We wanted to make the car silky smooth, kind of understated, and both in terms of the styling and the engine. One of the things we did with the engine was, and I don't want to give it a spin or a perception that it's bad manners, good manners, but we put a little bit of we had an intentional Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of approach to the way that it was going to be set up. And what do I mean by that? Now, typically, you know, one of them is bad manners. I never want the car to have bad manners, but split personality, I think, is a good way to look at it. If you're not pounding on the car and you just want to drive it around, or you want to give it to your wife to drive, and you know, it can be a really mellow, everyday car, and it's quiet and it doesn't make a lot of noise. And when you pound on that throttle, look out.
It comes alive.
It'll deliver. It'll come alive. And there's some tricks to tuning as well as the calibration in terms of, and they're very specific in that you want to make sure that that noise is suppressed below a certain level and then present above a certain other level. And it's a level of refinement. It's not just about, you know, is it strong enough? Is it this? But you're really trying to tune all those things where you put that throttle down and you know you're not in a toy. You know you're in a car that's meant to go. But if you don't do that, you just want to drive it mellow, it'll do that. And it's going to have good manners. And a lot of the cars, maybe not as much Ferrari, but some of the other ones would often have a particular reputation of being difficult to drive. And it's often treated as like, well, you know, if you can't drive it, you're not a good enough driver. But a lot of times those are flaws being papered over, where, you know, the marketing guys say if you can't fix it, feature it, right? But you can do a car that really does both and makes everybody happy.
Joe Brady says it's tough getting old, referring back to the we can't pull too many all-nighters in a row at
Absolutely.
this stage of the game. Joe Perez says, let's go over. Abel Aguirre says, great analogy. Thank you for your response. And Joe calls it the gentleman's muscle car.
That's a good way to put it, actually. Yep.
I think
it doesn't have a rough idle.
I think the car should come with an ascot. All right. Tell me about how did you do your brand research on Aston Martin?
So this is another funny story. So I certainly, let's talk about the other owners first. So I certainly went to Porsche owners and Ferrari owners and Corvette owners and you name it, and kind of really got a feel. And I was doing it a bit incognito. I didn't like say, hey, I'm doing the new V12 engine for Aston Martin. It was very quiet, and I just said, well, tell me about, I'm really curious about your brand. And they would tell me all kinds of different things, what they liked, what they didn't like. Inevitably, I would get around, even if they were non-Aston Martin owners, asking about what their perception of Aston Martin was as well. And we got to a situation where the Ferrari owners told me a few interesting things. One of them was the Ferrari guys were telling me, well, the Ferrari is special, very special. I said, really, how so? And they said, oh, it's a thoroughbred car and it needs all this special attention. And I bring it into the mechanic every 10,000 miles and they do the $10,000 tune-up. And, it's really at the cutting edge of technology. And one of the things they were referring to was that the manual valve lash adjust, right? You had to go in every 10,000 miles and do that. And you had to change the drive belt and do that. And I was like, well, yeah, that was true in the 60s. I'm like, I can fix that. So one of the things we determined we wanted to do, and this was part of the brand, was we were going to do chain drive for the life of the engine.
Yeah.
And we're also going to do hydraulic valve lash adjust, so you don't have to touch anything. And you put it in.
Plus.
What's that?
That's a big plus.
That's a big, big plus, right? I mean, and there's really, people say, oh, it doesn't have as high a performance. That's baloney for cars that rev at these RPMs today. I mean, a Corvette with a great big valve and a 2-valve engine, which is a great engine, don't get me wrong, but it's much bigger than a 4-valve engine, can rev to plenty of RPMs without any magic and have hydraulic valve lash adjust. Don't tell me you can't do it on a 4-valve modern engine. It's just baloney. Right. And the same is true of the chains. I can engineer a good modern chain, put it on there, and be done for the life of the vehicle and not have the service interval. The first service interval in the car is 100,000 miles to change the plugs. That's the first, other than oil and right. Coolants every 5 years. But, the only thing to really get in there and change is that. But it was funny. I'll get ahead of myself and come back to the Aston customers. But when I went and saw the Aston Martin dealers after we had established a dealer network down the road, I said to the dealer, I would ask the dealers, usually I go in and they think I want to buy a car. And then I just kind of say, well, I just really want to see how you guys are doing. And this is after I had left Ford and I talked to some of them. And they'd say, oh, the customers, they love the car. They can drive it every day. It's reliable. It starts in all weather, et cetera, et cetera. It's not as finicky as the Ferrari. The dealers love it. The cars sell. They're beautiful. They look good under hood, all that good stuff. But the mechanics, not so much. They don't really like it. I'm like, well, what's the problem? And they said, well, when they go to the factory training, they get to open up the engines and pull them apart and put them together. But out in the field, they don't get to open up the engines. They just, they just change the oil and coolant every once in a while, and they don't get to know it. I'm like, okay, so what?
So what's the problem?
Yeah, I'm like, what's the problem? They said, well, with the Ferraris, it was different. With the Ferraris, we would assign a mechanic to a car and an owner, and they would get to know each other, right? Because the car would always be in for service. And they would, they bring it in every 10,000 miles and do this. And they'd say, oh, the number 7 the exhaust valve is hanging up, and I've been checking on that. And they'd really get to know the mechanics, and they would build a personal relationship and send them Christmas cards and, say hello. And they're like, with the Aston, it's much more impersonal. They only get to change the oil, so they don't really like the car. I thought, well, it's not really.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I do feel for them. Don't get me wrong, but that's kind of the objective, to do that. Going back to the Aston customers, we had a very interesting problem that I had uncovered. And what happened is, so I go to the Aston customers, and I didn't tell them who I was or what I was doing, and a lot of that was the owners' clubs and things like that, and I'm talking to the customers. And this was largely in the UK. I didn't really talk to as many owners in the US of Astons because there was no dealer network and it was a much smaller AMOC owners club. So I talked to the owners in the UK, and they told me something funny. They said, well, if you're going to drive an Aston Martin, bring a good pair of walking shoes. I said, what? They said, yeah, bring a good pair of walking shoes. I said, why? They said, well, because you're going to need them. Right? Now, this is the part of the story where I expect that I'm going to get, they don't know who I am and what I'm doing, but I'm expecting them to say, they really have to fix that. That's a problem. But they didn't. They didn't say that. What they said was, they said, oh, you know, there I was driving my Aston Martin and I hit a bump and it was a perfectly dry, you know, crisp autumn day, and the entire dashboard went dark and the electrical system went out and the ignition went off and the car coasted to the side of the road. So I looked and I couldn't get the car started. So I got out of the car, I looked around, and there was a farmhouse down the road. So I hiked over to the farmhouse and, you know, knocked on the door, and I met the farmer's wife, and she was so nice, and we had tea and crumpets, and then later the farmer came back and we milked the cow and we made cheese, and oh, it was the greatest day I ever had. You know, they would tell me stories like this. Like, you know, if they didn't break down, they wouldn't have met these people, right? So then I found the other thing was, and they were all good guys. They were all great, great guys. Another one was, I realized that the Aston Martin, a lot of the owners were like puzzle guys, right? They would take the car, they would put it in the barn, it sat for a week, and then a week later they would go to fire it up and it wouldn't go. But they would exchange tricks that they all kind of learned from each other. And one of them would say, well, you know, if you spray the blood of 2 Westminster chickens on the carburetor, it'll fire right up. You know, who knows why that worked, but it did, right? So I realized this, and I came back to Dearborn at Ford, and I said, you know, if we're going to resurrect this brand, we're going to piss off some of the customers. Because if the cars are reliable, they're going to say that they have less character. You know, and we made a conscious decision and hoped for the best and said, well, we can develop character in other ways, in the performance of the car and how it feels and how it drives and the torque. And yeah, some of them will probably say it's too clinical or whatever, and they won't have the fun of being able to solve all these cool little puzzles that they get every week when the car doesn't fire up. But we're going to take the chance on that and go for it. And we did. But it was a very conscious decision because we knew that if we were going to get a whole bunch of new customers, it better darn well start as well as any other car. And this new customer base would be intolerant to that. And the hope was the old customer base would accept it. And
I think the American customer wouldn't be as thrilled about breaking down and going over to somebody's house and having tea and crumpets with them.
Yes.
That's not our way of life here. Now, DJ says, given the electric motor's torque advantage versus gas/diesel, what would be the impact on Aston Martin, Ferrari, Lamborghini supercars?
So that's a whole different topic, which I am going to cover in another story. But that's something a lot of people are trying to figure out, and I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about. But yeah, that would be another time.
Yeah.
That'd be a whole other hour.
You talked about the teamwork and the full involvement of the team, where everybody was kind of bought in and everybody's towing the rope. Is there anything you want to expand on that, or did you pretty much cover that?
I mean, those are the main points. Really, like I said, getting everybody at a different level is important, and really maintaining that. It's about, probably the most important thing I can add to that is, if you're in a leadership position on a team, often you have to make a decision that maybe isn't a majority. It's not about voting and going a direction. It's about, having to pick a direction. And the hardest thing of all is when you're going to go in a direction when not the majority of people agree with it, you have to be a lot more convincing, and really, and you have to also say, convince me to go another way. I'll do it. But if you don't convince me, I'm going to go this way, or we're going to, because my boss is going to come to me and say, because ultimately I'm responsible, but we're also responsible as a team, but I have to make the decision that I feel is right. Right. Here's why. And you got to spend a lot of time really working that out. And I'd like to think most of the time I'm right, but when I'm not, you got to step up and say I was wrong and apologize to the team and go back. Now, with experience, those excursions are shorter.
Right, right.
And you can determine these things much more quickly before you get far down the path. And with experience, you're probably making the right call. I mean, you're doing a good job when the majority of people say, I don't fully agree with you, but I trust you, and I'm going to go with that. And that's a big thing. You and I talked about. Yeah, it's huge. And you and I talked about this a little bit offline earlier, Paul, and that is, if I'm not going to take someone's idea on board, I spend a lot more time explaining why I think we're going to go a different direction than when I take someone's idea on board. When you take their idea on board and give them credit, it's easy. I mean, full go. Everybody,
right.
They get it and they're happy. But if you don't take their idea on board, you got to have that discussion. On an occasion, they'll convince you that you're wrong, and if you are, you say, yep, you know what? You're right. You convinced me. Let's change course. But when you're not going to go with their idea, you really need to talk that through. And if you do that, they'll trust you for the next one. Because if you don't take those ideas and just throw them away, eventually you stop getting them. People don't.
Right, exactly. And here's the interesting thing too, that when you have those types of conversations, sometimes what's easy for somebody else to see, maybe we don't see, or vice versa. And when you have those types of conversations, I'm sure some good ideas came to life in those moments where you didn't agree, where the other person had an aha moment. Oh, okay, now I see what you're talking about. So if we did it this way and that way, now you could, like I said, true collaboration, you come up with a better way.
Well, realize this. I mean, you're making that decision at a point in time, right? And the technology around you is constantly changing. What you're even learning about your own product that you're developing is actually changing. Test data is coming back. You're getting data from test cars in the field. Other programs have learned something within Ford Motor Company, you name it. So you have to be willing to change that direction rather quickly. But, you're not making a decision in a vacuum, but those are all good reasons. And what really happens is when the team is very, very strong, these discussions are more lengthy up front.
Yeah.
But when you get further along in the program and the trust is built, they're shorter. They're far more creative. People are far smarter, but your cycle time is very, very reduced because people are like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. And a big part of that, another thing that's really worth adding is with the FCG program at Ford, it was a great program for me, and I had done work on cars before that, and I had designed race cars before that. But all of that experience comes to bear. And what I also encouraged among teams was, if you're one of the CAD guys, go work with the mechanic for a day. If you and make sure everything's right and back and forth, so that the efficiency gain, even though you lose a little bit up front, is tremendous going forward, because they communicate independent of you. They just keep you involved in like what's going on.
Yeah.
They built their own relationship, their own trust. They understand each other's problem. It's not like my job is the toughest job. Everybody's job is pretty tough. That's why we're doing it.
Sure.
And the cycle times are vastly reduced by the end of the program. And that's why we had the best team towards the end of it. We had a very small team. And when I say team, I've talked a lot about, resources, myself inside Ford, other people inside Ford, but that also involves suppliers at every level.
Right.
We don't differentiate. Yeah, you don't get your paycheck from Ford, but I'm looking out for you to make sure you make a profit. I'm looking out for you to make sure you can make a good part. You're looking out for me to make sure I get a good part. This is a team effort. We're all going to be successful on this, or we're all not going to be successful. Period. Full stop.
Now, to your point about, so you're evolving as you're creating this project, because you're getting data back, right, from cars out in the field and things like that. How many engines might be built before you go to production? How many test cars are out there before you go to full production? So
a normal program would have several levels. With the V12, we just had handfuls of engines.
Okay.
Right? We did one iteration and then we did a few small changes and we went straight to production.
Wow.
That's highly unusual. But what it also did, because we didn't have this budget, we weren't like blessed from above with this big budget. It was like we're going to make we're either going to make this happen or we're not, right? And that forced a lot of discipline on all of us, and it also forced a lot of, we need to make this right the first time. We went from
pressure.
Well, yeah. What it does is it forces your hand on a lot of decisions too.
Yeah.
Right. If it might be a little better, but it's not ready, you don't put it on. And there's plenty of things we didn't put on, but we built in the ability to be put on later. But we're like, this greatest gee whiz contraption, if I put it on and it's unreliable, what the heck is that going to do to the reputation of the engine? And tank it. And Aston's trying to come back. Right.
You can't afford that.
No. So it's got to be right out of the box. And then, a year or two down the line, we can introduce it. It also gives us a good path to put improvements on down the line. We have plans and stuff.
Joe Brady says the vehicle/motor is a true testament to the beauty of the art of application engineering and team leadership. Wonderful to see your level of enthusiasm and passion hasn't diminished.
Well, it's always a fun story to talk about. It's done well for me on every project I've done since, and I'd like to think everybody in the team feels the same way as well.
Mark Williamson says, great show, guys. Love hearing these stories. All right, let's say, tell me about the advanced planning for Aston Martin's dealer network planning, and discuss how you prepared for the dealers to maintain and service the cars, because that's a huge undertaking as well.
So by this time, we had become much more official. So, and people could see the car and drive the car. And we had some fantastic illustrators. We had some fantastic guys to do manuals. And really, I leaned very, very hard on the Ford dealer network guys. And they plugged into it right away and stepped up. And we were really ready to kind of pull this information together and put that level together so that when the dealers got stuff, they had all the OBD2 codes, they had all the diagnostics. Now, there's always stuff you learn, but It was similar enough to other programs that we could go in very, very well prepared. And we talked to, I talked to a lot of Ferrari and Ford dealers and Porsche dealers. There weren't any Aston dealers to speak of because we didn't know who they were going to be at the time. I assumed they would probably be some of the Ferrari dealers and other ones because there's some synergies to those low volume guys kind of brand.
Prepared.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense, and you can share mechanics because they're both great mechanics for both programs. And that was a big part of kind of making sure that was ready. The training was really done on the Aston side with the help of the Ford people, and Ford, I give Ford a lot of credit, and I don't think they get enough for modernizing Aston Martin, and I give Aston Martin a lot of credit for being unique. There's some things that some people can say, use this Ford part or that Ford part, but really on the whole, I think Ford did a fantastic job of maintaining Aston's independence while still leveraging the best of Ford and showcasing the best of Ford and Aston. And that went down to the dealer network as well. And they, so that the level of professionalism, because let's face it, when you're dealing with a Ford dealership, right, that's a very high volume dealership, right? And if you figured out how to, handle that kind of volume of information and variety of cars, in some ways it's a little bit of an easier problem to set up an Aston dealership. There are some uniqueness and some differences for sure, but the Ford guys were really great at bringing that in, and we worked very closely with the Ford dealer network team. I mean, I was part of Ford. I hadn't worked with that part of the organization before this program, because normally when you're on a big engine program, that goes to another group. But because we had 3 design engineers for the majority of the program, all this cradle to grave stuff fell on us. And I'll give you a funny story. At one point in the program, we had a group that was led by a gentleman by the name of John Hummel. And John and his group were in a group called Material Control. And material control was responsible for essentially making sure that all the parts for both production and aftermarket and the ordering systems were all set up to kind of go forward. Now, we cheated a little bit with inside of Ford, and I say cheated, and I use that term rather loosely. Everything was on the up and up, don't get me wrong. But Ford had a system called Worldwide Engineering Release System. All right, and this is from the engineering side, and they would put all the stuff in, and when you would do a normal program, it would get tracked along the way, and there were hundreds of people interfacing with each other, kind of doing all these different things. And the way you're supposed to do it is you're supposed to put all the information into the system as you get the information, right? So you're starting to design on a part, you declare you're starting to design on a part, you get a part number, it's a water pump, it's for this new engine, it's a cylinder head for this new engine, a block, boom, 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 boom. And those are all different people, right? There's a cylinder block engineer, there's a water pump engineer, there's another engineer, and then they're interfacing with program managers that are making sure that the suppliers are working this and that it's all going to happen on time, and all these different layers.
It's like an orchestra.
Yes, and it's designed for a large program, right? And if we get into the program at a certain point, we'll be interfacing with a stupid number of people, and there's only 3 of us. And the other problem with WERS, and I say problem, it's not really a problem, it's designed for a different volume of car, is that the criticality of the problem is based upon how many days it's open. So if it's been open 30 days, it's like, yellow. When it's open 45 days, it goes, hard yellow, and then it goes red at 60, whatever it is. And let's say, like, I'm going to make up something rather pointless. Let's say you had a visor on a car, and the visor was not, holding up. If it's 45 days late, that has higher priority than engines blowing up.
Wow.
And you say, well, how can that be? And it's not really that it is. The problem is there's an engineer for the visor, and he needs to be doing his job, and that's tracking him doing his job. But if the engine blows up, you can't expect the guy to fix it in a day.
Right.
Right? But in our program, we needed the ability to, like, ignore the visor for now. We'll get to that and focus on the engine, and we're just dealing with engine parts. So we didn't put it in that system. We had an Excel spreadsheet until we were complete and done, and the program was official. Then one night we came in on like a Friday night, and we loaded all the components into the system, all several hundred of them. And by Monday morning, there was this new engine that appeared in the Ford system. And it was completely loaded and completely released, which is unheard of. We didn't go through the steps. It was basically, here's a part number, it's assigned, engineering is done, and it's released. Now, that wasn't actually true, but that's how we did it. And then that's when John Hummel and his team sort of got involved, and they're like, where did this come from? and Jim Clark, our chief engineer, let him know a little bit. So we go over to John's group, and we sit around this big oak table, okay? And John and his team of about 4 or 5 people that were going to handle all these parts, we were debriefing them, and it was myself, Bernard, and Don. We sit around the oak table, and we're going over it part by part by part. There's a long list, and we're just reading through them. And we get to the end of the list, and they say, gentlemen, we are very impressed. You guys are more prepared than any team we've ever dealt with before. How these parts are designed, what the critical things are, what the lead times are, who the suppliers are, what the costs are. You got all the engineering details, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're feeling really comfortable about this program. We're just going to ask you to do one thing. And we said, sure, what is that? And they said, well, we'd like you to bring back, copies of the discussions that we've had today from the meeting notes to the team and distribute it amongst the team. And they handed us, I don't know how many binders, but several boxes full of binders. So, they made copies right then and there. We had a very high-speed copy machine. And we obligingly took the copies and loaded them into the binders and loaded them into the trunk of our car, and tried to contain ourselves from laughing out wildly, because when we got in the car, we said, yeah, John and his team don't realize that we are the team.
Right.
There's nobody to distribute this stuff to. In fair defense of them, we weren't a normal program, and they didn't realize that yet. And we weren't about to tell them because we probably would have panicked them, right? So we got back, and they got to know us, and they realized what was going on. And we had a great relationship with them, and they were awesome. They were absolutely awesome in integrating it into the wider program. But it was a bit of a, like, what do you mean this is that? We've never seen a program like this. You got 3 guys. Normally there's 400 engineers. I'm like, no, not on this program.
Well, for being an unofficial program, right, that wasn't sanctioned, so to speak, your team did pretty well with it. That had to have evolved the kind of the relaunch of this car. No,
what do you mean? What do you mean by that specifically?
I mean, this had to be something that, when word got out, the much anticipated. People like, wow, this sounds really cool. This is something I want. I mean, did they hype it up much, or was it a silent, like
no,
a soft launch?
That was all internal. That was all
wow,
internal.
No kidding.
I mean, that was, Ford is like, look what we did, and
But wouldn't that have done more for the brand if they kind of hyped it up?
So. Yes, I think so, but there's a whole long story behind that. The 3 of us left Ford Motor Company after that program because we didn't fit in Ford anymore.
Oh, okay.
I had a good time. It was great. I enjoyed it, but yeah, no, they didn't. That wasn't part of the deal.
Very interesting. Where's the dealer network today?
So today, I'm very happy to say, so Aston's come a long way. They're every bit as good as Ferrari. In some ways, I would argue they probably even passed them with the help of Ford in, their supply network and how they did. And they're independent, as you know. They've been sold from Ford, and they're very much more modern. The product line was refreshed. When we did DB7 was to transplant a new engine that was planned to have long-term legs for the company, whether it was growth in just power or supercharging or turbocharging or racing or whatever. Yep. But really to put that engine in an existing car with a minimal budget, allow that growth, when it grew and they had a lot of money, build cars around the engine, which they did since, DB9, Vanquish, DB11, Rapide, Vantage, you name it. Well, the Vantage actually they built around the V8 first, put the V12 in later, but essentially it was that, and the whole thing was modernized. I mean, Gaydon, Aston Martin has a beautiful facility now in Gaydon, England. When I worked with them, they didn't have the funding for that kind of thing. I'd like to think that the V12 was a big contribution in helping them be able to afford that, and they have proper facilities now. They've been able to really expand from that. The customers love the cars. I think the dealers overall are very happy. It's come a long way, and I'm happy to see it come a long way.
And tell us about your ASC certification.
So after I had left Ford a number of years, beyond that, I was at a dealership, and I was showing one of the technicians something, and I picked up a wrench. And one of the lead guys at the dealer said, he says, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I have to ask, do you have ASC certification, which, is your mechanic certification? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, well, I got to ask you to put the tool down because my insurance won't cover me. And I was like, you do realize I wrote the book.
You wrote the torque spec in the book.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm like, okay, I get it. I can respect that. But it was kind of comical because technically I'm not qualified to work on the V12. So that was my laugh for the day at the time. And they were great guys, and I understood what their requirements were and why they had to do that. So I talked the technician through it, and off we went.
What's funny is that I liken that to parenting today. Okay. Our kids, when they have kids, forget that we had kids as parents. And when you want to take care of the grandkids, they're fearful because they don't realize that you know how to take care of the grandkids.
Well, I mean, I kind of chalk it up to more of like over-regulation. You can't grandfather me in, really?
That's funny.
You know, I get it.
Let's see. Joe Perez says, automotive manufacturing history. I can listen to this for several hours. Abel Aguirre says, Anthony, how did you deal with leading by example and having others not see that? What drives you to just do your best in a situation like that?
I mean, you know, the thing I like to I think of is like, you know, if you're in a job, why are you there? Right?
Yeah.
Do your best. People will see that if you enjoy it. I know it's often easier in a leadership position to do that than it is from the bottom. But even from the bottom, kind of work it up. I mean, I was at the bottom of Ford. I was lucky to get this opportunity. I fully recognize that. I mean, part of it was my willingness and enthusiasm to jump on it, and my willingness and enthusiasm to do whatever it took. But a big part of that too was, you know, a lot of luck, and I was blessed with a lot of good luck. But you know, when you get that opportunity, probably the best thing is when you get that opportunity, jump on it. And I think that was a big part of, you know, building that team effort, building that what's the thing, culture. That's the word I'm looking for. Bringing that team culture is that when people see that in you, it can be pretty infectious, and you know, suddenly it's part of their experience. And you know, I remember we had some of the guys that were doubters on the V12, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. I mean, you know, they were more trying to protect us than anything else.
Sure.
Saying, look, you know, you guys are enthusiastic. I like to see that, but don't, you know, Ford will, you know, or the system will kind of grind you down. But we got to a point not too far down the road where those guys would, you know, I came around the corner one day hearing one of the guys working for me telling one of the suppliers, no, you don't understand. This is the V12 program. We do stuff different here. We do it right. We do it well. You know, and that's, you know, people weren't enthusiastic about me. They were enthusiastic about the program. And basically my job was to set an example that wasn't about me, that was about the program. And that, you know, that's really what it's all about. And you know, when you really enjoy that and you're really genuine, people can see that.
Yeah. And when you can't fake that.
You can't fake that. You can't fake it.
Michael Larkin says, learned a ton. Thanks for sharing, gentlemen. Love this stuff. Wow, this has been really, really super educational. You know, I read some of the stuff, you know, some of your articles, but this was really, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it, and hopefully, you know, everybody got a little something out of it. I know I certainly had some fun.
So automotive history, man. The automotive history in the making. This is like the History Channel, but you're talking to the guy in the show.
Well, just one of them. There were a lot of us.
One of the guys. But nonetheless, you were there. So that is really cool. Joe Perez says, Anthony is the Edward Deming of engineering. I think Joe's a big fan of yours, man. Everyone wins together, Joe says.
Absolutely.
Wow. So we went over a little bit, but it was much necessary because we needed to cover all this up, and this was great. I will give you a call tomorrow because there's some more stuff I want to talk to you about.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, and appreciate everybody joining, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Hope you guys have a successful week coming up, and we'll see you next week on Sunday Night Live.